Thank you very much for coming along to this session this morning. It's always a tough one of the sort of second morning in Boston, after there's been brewery tours and other activities. So thanks for coming along. My name is Stuart Maxwell. I'm very delighted to be here this morning. I'm from Scholarly IQ, but more importantly, I'm joined today by Ben Spiegel from Group M, which is the sort of data and digital arm for supporting parts of the WPP Group, which is the sort of largest ad buying agency in the world. So great to have somebody from sort of outside of the industry giving their perspectives on data and kind of what they're doing in sort of working with data for sort of consumer media. And I've also got Sammy Hero, who's VP of sort of customer engagement and looking at all sorts of things around sort of subscription strategies and not cannibalizing print and thinking how can we engage with customers in different ways and leverage those. So giving again from another sort of publisher's perspective to kind of talk about how we're working with data or how we can look to work with data to sort of transform and to sort of take our digital businesses sort of into the future. So where's the thing? I've done this on Prezi. You might have seen Prezi beforehand. I don't think it's too vertigo-inducing. I know it can be sometimes. So if you start feeling nauseous, let me know, as it can be a tricky one. Let's try that one instead. Yeah. Okay. We did a survey earlier on in the year across a range of academic publishers. So there's some graphs in this about some findings we had. If you want some copies of it, because I'm not going to go into every single detail of each of the answers and the responses, because that'd be too dull for data on a Friday morning, then let me know, drop a card in or go to our site, request it, and we'll send over the details for it for you as well. So why become data-driven? What's it about for us? Well, four simple things. We're answering questions, we're making decisions, we're thinking about what we're going to do next, and we're trying to solve some problems. And at Scholarly IQ, that's kind of the core of what we do for academic publishers. Doing that with things like the counter usage stats, so there's confidence in that data. There's an underlying currency of what you're doing. And that's really to answer all sorts of questions depending on where you're coming from in the business. And that's got to cross over all those stakeholders, whether from marketing or sales or whoever else data's there to kind of really help what you're doing. So as I said, part of what we're going to do is touch on this survey we did. It's maybe a bit skewed because it went to sort of Scholarly IQ contacts. So we've got a certain bunch of contacts we work with. We had sort of 41 respondents, which was pretty decent, for out of sort of 250 people we sent it to. This is kind of the profiles of those, so just trying to give you some context about who was responding to it. Because when we're looking at data, context about where it's come from is really important. So kind of sort of product management, directors, managers, some marketing, those kinds of individuals were responding to this. And we kind of asked them questions like, which part of your organizations have the best opportunity to benefit from data in what you're doing. And, great to see the product managers nominating themselves, but also sort of marketing and sort of sales and others there as well, to say, sort of what they can do with that data. And we also asked them about, currently where are they with data in their decision making? And pretty much all of them saying it's important, very important or essential. So we're looking to become more data driven in what we're doing. And actually good to know that nobody really responded saying it's not important at all. So obviously data is becoming more of a focus for a lot of publishers. We also asked them about what state do they think their organization's sort of data strategy is in. Where are we getting to on this sort of growth? And majority it's in development. And if you look at that against the other marks, we're probably a little bit behind where we're thinking we should be, how important data is to us, but how mature we are in actually sort of managing and setting our sort of data strategies of how we work with data. And so what's kind of causing these challenges? Everybody's heard all the buzz things about big data. Snowden and all the rest of it. Data's kind of all around us, and we'll be hearing a lot more about how people are working with it. But you can never do that without talking about the V's of big data. So people talk about the volume, the amount of data you've got, the velocity, the speed at which we're receiving and need to respond to data, the variety, the different types, the complexities that we have that we need to get to work and to operate in the business. The veracity is the sort of accuracy, how trustworthy, how transparent, how much can we really sort of value in that data. And then through from that, the actual how we get value from it as well. So people talk about data, they say they've got to look at these 5 V's to really understand kind of what the opportunities and challenges are. So we asked our publishers, we said, okay, which of these is the biggest challenge for you? And predominantly, there's the variety, all the different types of data we've got was the sort of the largest influence, the biggest thing that was a challenge for them. Less involved in velocity, we haven't got massive data volumes traditionally, most of us that we're dealing with, and technology is very advanced now that can respond to that. But the complexity of the types of data is a real challenge. And then also, the veracity, actually seeing sort of that accuracy. How do you get a seam of accuracy that gives sort of trust in the insights and the way that you use that information? So kind of how did we get here with this kind of complexity of data? And we kind of thought about a sort of evolution of a publisher. And traditionally, we would have been in print, we might have had a multiple number of titles, and we would have had editors responsible for those titles, and in the old days we would have had little fiefdoms for who owned which titles or which subject areas and where we came from. And because of that, we would have had separate customer and content and business data across those different areas. And we kind of diversified that, we got more products and different conferences, and the web thing came along, and now the web thing, traditionally, a lot of businesses kind of did it in silos. So whoever's responsible for a particular title or a subject area or whatever else, they'd start off a website or a group of them, and somebody else in another part of the business would go and experiment and try something else as well. So we ended up with just more diversification of all these different data points. So the publisher's then sitting in the situation where I've got all these multiple disparate data elements, and I'm trying to understand how this means, how do I manage my business around all these different sets? So a lot of customers now, a lot of publishers we work with are going through this kind of consolidation. I want to centralize it. I want to have some core information that drives the business. Phrases like single version of the truth come up and those kind of sort of elements. But it's about that sort of consolidation, saying actually in these areas, can we link that data together? But even still, if we go outside of that, and if we had all the data for each parameter in the same place, there's a huge range of different data types, dimensions that we might look at. So I just listed a bunch of them that we commonly work with at Scholarly IQ that we're trying to knit together to get reporting to work from. So there's sort of financial stuff, obviously, around pricing and surveys and sponsorships or advertising or whatever else it might be. There's technical data through from sort of clickstream behavior. In content, we're looking at DOIs and subject areas and authors and source institutions and all sorts of other elements, and then we've still got the customer and user data as well. And so we've got loads of different variety elements of data that for us to try and ask questions for, whether it's from editorial or sales, that we might want to pivot that data around to try and get some intelligence from it. And that's going to be a challenge in itself, but we're hearing more, and there's more opportunities out there, and other data points coming in around things like mobile, social, research objects. If you start putting in workflows and data into the articles, then we're sort of just expanding that further from that data. So we asked the publishers, we said, okay, well, out of these categories that we've got, which ones are you able to see? Which ones are kind of important for them? And most of them are there. They're pretty high visibility of data for publishers that they're trying to understand and work with. We also asked them which actually influence their decision making. And pretty much, actually, there's a good parity for that. Maybe a bit short on some of the user data that we'd like to see. And whether actually that's because the systems aren't there or actually because of the availability. And that raises all sorts of other questions about what we might like to see for user data, but possibly what can we use with all the sort of privacy concerns and compliance on that. But because we've got all these different data systems, we find that they're often working with lots of different business intelligence tools. So if we look at this, the mean is somewhere around probably the 7 or so different business intelligence tools interpreting data and providing us information. And the thing is, if you look at those, they're quite often a Venn diagram. They cross over, they give different numbers, and your business spends a lot of time going, how do we resolve this? Which one is right? The answer always actually generally is that all of them are right. It's just the context, the way the data's been captured, and the question they've got. Oops, that was the wrong way. So how do we go about handling this? Well, part of it is thinking about what is the data strategy. Where is ownership for this? How should we work with it? And at the moment, for most of them, predominantly, it's kind of sort of siloed. And if we think about that history, how we've evolved, that's probably quite common, because it's been those different business departments developing the different tools, the different data sets, and therefore they're siloed by those functions. When we ask them, however, about where it should sit, we find actually that siloed just completely goes off. So we're currently working in models where we've got siloed ownership of data, but actually where it should work, is more probably in a sort of centralized owner or by working through sort of a cross-departmental sort of level. So kind of more of a concerted, centralized sort of ownership for it. So for Scholarly IQ, we thought, okay, well, we'd like to give some people some takeaways. What can we do about all these challenges with data? So we came up with the sort of ideas of sort of, we've had the 5 V's, so we came up with the 7 C's to go from there. So one of them was thinking about consolidation. How can we join these data elements together? How can that support the business with sort of fewer data points or data points that are more related to each other? The second side actually is thinking about consistency about the data going in, okay, but also the questions that we ask of it as well. So that we are changing, we're adapting, we're evolving what we're doing based upon insight that's actually having a consistent sort of analysis and growth into that. Next, having a currency there. Quite often where we've got different data coming from different sources, different stakeholders would have different questions for it, and therefore there's that lack of trust in it. And so having a currency that sits through the information, the metrics you're working with is very important, just to drive that confidence from the different stakeholders who might be using it. And that's both sort of internally and externally. Next, thinking about the context. Okay, how do we ask questions of the data? When we're going through the survey, it's quite important for us to talk about actually where it came from, who answered those questions. Because actually if there's more of sort of sales teams or marketing teams or others, we probably would have got some different answers. So we do need to think about that. So where did the information come from? And then when we're asking questions of it, what's the context of those questions? Clarity. A lot of times we ask questions of the data we've got, and we say, what can we do to make this better? And it's too nebulous. We need to think about the structure of questions that we go through to actually give something which allows some reporting, some analysis, to enable then for those sort of analyses to be automated with the actions we take from it, and then we're using data more as a fuel to drive other optimizations. And if we think about things like the media industry, all those recommendations we see, the behavioral targeting, they've taken through from looking at data, understanding if we take these actions, we can optimize something, but then technology comes along and says, well, if that's working, you don't need somebody to go and make those changes every 2 minutes. The technology can enhance that for us. Next, thinking about causation. We've got these data elements coming out with different results, and often we look at stuff and we say, well, there's a correlation between those two. And sometimes you might be tempted to go, well, that moved and that moved at the same time, so that must be what's influencing it. You've got to ask more questions of it. You've got to be able to have that flexibility to look at it through different parameters to test actually whether it is actually a causation or just a correlation. And correlations can be dangerous. I've mentioned it to a few people this week. I saw a lovely one called, I've forgotten it now, Spurious Correlations. It's a website. They've ingested loads of US government data, and they found things like there's a direct correlation between the number of movies Nicolas Cage is appearing in the year and the number of people that drown in swimming pools. So beware Nicolas Cage. And finally, the next bit is thinking about the corporate governance. This issue about where data ownership should work. How do you create a strategy to go through these changes? Thinking about what data we can capture, what data we can store, what data we can keep, what data we can then use is going to become obviously sort of more prevalent in certain markets for us from there. So hopefully those 7 C's are things that might help you to think about where our data's come from, what we need to do to start working with it better going forwards. So we put this up on the Scholarly IQ site, but also you can email us or drop a card at the end if you want to have a look more into that research underneath it. We did it through SurveyMonkey, but there's some quite interesting thoughts. See whether it sort of matches in with your own experiences. Okay, we'll have some questions and answers hopefully at the end, so hopefully that might have spared some of them. But we're going to now look at some more real-world examples of people actually working with data to optimize those. So I'm going to ask Ben to stand up to give his perspective on what Group M is doing in working with data around the sort of media and advertising world. So I'm looking forward to this. Thank you, Ben.